Here ends our gospel. Now, if you remember a couple weeks ago, we talked about context clues and how to read Scripture. And whenever something starts, when evening came, his disciples went down to the sea and got into the boat. You want to know when evening came is a context clue that they're continuing some story. When evening came means something happened right before that led them into this story. And if you go back, it was actually our miracle from last week. It was Jesus feeding the 5,000. So let's paint this picture just a tad. Is what's happening is the 5,000 came, and then Jesus fed them. And when Jesus fed them, they loved the miracle. Right? This is miracle working Jesus, and they got fed, and they can hear the word. That's great. So what they did at the end of that is they wanted to take Jesus as their king forcibly. They wanted to grab him and take him and say, "You're our king," and then parade him into town and say, "This is our new king." But Jesus is like, that's not me. That's not how this is going to work. That's not the gospel that I'm bringing. That's not the kingdom I'm talking about. And so what happened with that is that Jesus said, "I'm retreating up a mountain," right? And in the Gospel of Matthew, it actually says he constrained the disciples to the boat. It doesn't say they got into a boat and they had a nice little boat ride. It says Jesus constrained them in the boat. Literally took them and put them in the boat and said, "Stay here, go there," right? And then he walked up the mountain. How many of you knew that about the text? How many of you have ever heard that before? Do you know why he said that? It's so interesting. Because the disciples most likely wanted to make him king also. They got caught up in this 5,000 going, "Make him king." And they're going, "This is a great idea. Yes, Jesus should be king. Look at the miracles he does. He's healing people. This is wonderful. The gospel's incredible. Let's make him king." And Jesus is like, "You're in the boat. You're going that way. Not our mission here. Go this way." And so the disciples listened, which was a beautiful thing, and they got into the boat. But here's the picture. It's dark outside. And I want you to paint this with times in your life when it's been dark. It's been dark and Jesus is not with them. All right? So that's an important reality. Jesus sent them, but he's not with them yet. And then the wind increased, the waves increased, and a storm hit, and then they saw a ghost. In the Gospel of Matthew, it says they saw a ghost. Right? And here it says they saw Jesus, which is great. So the Gospel's kind of, which one was it? They saw a ghost. So now imagine that you're on a boat 4 miles out, so you can't go back. That's what that means in the text, that they're not going to turn around and just go back. They're too far out. It's dark outside. The waves are crashing. There's no Jesus, and there's a ghost walking on water. Right? How many of you are like, "I'm so in for this scenario. Like, I love this." Now let's go back to the beginning. Who constrained them to the boat? Say it out loud. Jesus did it. And here's what I want you to see. Jesus sends and Jesus saves. And there's a whole lot that happens in the middle. Jesus sends and Jesus saves, and there's a whole lot that happens in the middle. And where we get stuck before the gospel conclusion of saving is we get stuck in the middle. We get stuck like the disciples on a boat, fearing for our lives, even though Jesus sent us, because we forget the saving action, and we get stuck in the storm and in the darkness and going, "Jesus isn't here," but Jesus sent them. See, in our lives, when things get dark and we feel like Jesus is not there, Jesus has sent us and Jesus saves us. And this is that moment where that faith becomes a reality. It becomes a reality saying, okay, hold on, if we are truly on a mission from God, if we're hearing that God has sent us, and we are going on this mission, there is so much more here than us being afraid of a storm. But that's our human reality. And so in the Gospel of Matthew, the story actually continues. And I want you to hear this. So turn to Matthew real quick. We're going to be in Matthew chapter 14. And I want you to hear the other gospel tell kind of the continuation of this story. So Matthew chapter 14, and we're going to read verses 22 through 31. So immediately, again, there's your context clue. He made the disciples get into the boat, constrained them to the boat is what that says, and go ahead to the other side while he dismissed the crowds. He went up to the mountain to pray, and when evening came, he was there alone. So this is telling them that the disciples are on the way. Do you see how they're saying that the disciples are now gone and evening has come? But by this time, in verse 24, the boat, battered by the waves, was far from land, for the wind was against them. And early in the morning, he came walking toward them on the sea. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified, saying, "It is a ghost." How many times have they seen someone walking on the sea? Like at that point with all the miracles of Jesus, wouldn't you be like, it's Jesus, like, this is great. Nope, it's a ghost. And they cried out in fear. They were terrified. But immediately Jesus spoke to them and said, take heart, it is I, do not be afraid. That voice that we hear from Jesus when we're in the midst of the darkness, in the raging sea. Take heart, it is I, do not be afraid. Now listen to this, Peter 11. Let's test the Lord. This is great. Peter answered him, Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water. I'm sure he turned to the disciples like, this is going to be cool, right? Like there's a moment there, like I don't know where Peter's at. One, don't test the Lord thy God. Like that's just stay in the solid range of don't do that. Have faith, right? But then Peter's going, hey, I want to walk on water too. Tell me to come to you. And he said, come. So Peter got out of the boat and started walking on the water and came toward Jesus. But when he noticed the strong wind that was already there, he became frightened and beginning to sink. He cried out, Lord, save me. And Jesus immediately reached out his hand and caught him, saying, you of little faith, why did you doubt? And when they got into the boat, the wind ceased, and they worshiped him.